guys, we're back with Nepo. It is January, so we are 11 months into the coat. Sorry that I haven't done a video recently. It's been a crazy fall and a crazy winter. But he is just about at the point where we really have to get things going. So the big thing, if you look at, he's probably got about 2 inches of coat at this point. Maybe about 2.5. Big thing for me at this point when it comes to splitting the cords, or in this case they're almost more like paddles right now, we'll get to the cords a little bit later, is texture. I am not going to split something that doesn't feel like felt. And the reason being is this. Come a little closer. If I split something that doesn't feel like felt, all I'm going to get is fluff. If I split what feels like felt, I start to get things like this. Now, this is how I started probably a couple months ago, not even a month or two ago, being that his neck, as I told you in the last video, starts to split into these waves. Well, I've kept them going, these particular sections. You can see they're pretty well delineated at this point. But even still, when I look here, I've still got some fluff, and even if I start to pull these apart, I can tell just by the texture they're a little bit looser. They don't have that tight feeling, that all I'm going to do is get fluff in between, and they're just going to make a mess. So I'm actually going to leave these like this, really thick, or thin, but really broad, for another probably month or two. The place that I'm really going to start to get to work, as you can see, this is kind of a mess over here. It's a blob that I really haven't been doing anything with. This especially, like right here, this is a perfect example. It's just mush here. It's really, really soft. We've got great curls coming out, but underneath there's no body to it. There's only, I can feel certain places I've got that felty quality. And those are the places where I'm going to be able to split. But if I split something that's not ready, like if I split this blob right here, I'm just getting, it's mushy. And that's just going to go back together the next time that he gets washed or the next time he sleeps on it. So this spot right here, I mean, I may follow, there's some lines that I'll follow, like this one looks like it's ready. I'll take that apart. But here, it's not ready to be split any more than that, so I'm going to leave it alone. Looking at his legs, I told you guys it was a pretty easy spot. You can tell, aside from the fluff he's got in him, that they're doing all right. I have to do a little bit of splitting here and there. Again, splitting a lot of the times into those rows like we did on his neck. But all in all, these are pretty good. They're coming along fine. I can do a little more work on them. It's like 10, 15 minutes. You know, I watch TV. And I sit there automatically, I'm just pulling cords. And again, for me, it's texture. So I don't even have to look and see what I'm looking at. I'm going by the texture as to whether or not I can break them any finer. Don't worry if some of these guys look a little fat, as far as like a little wide. They're pretty thin, as I said. These actually, I've found, will split later on when they're ready to. And in some cases, they'll actually start to split themselves. So you can tell this one's probably going to become 2 just by that curl at the end. The gold mine, the place we really got to get going on, is back here. You'll notice if we come over the top that I've got, if he'll stand still, we've got some gorgeous spots. Now this is what we want. When we come back to the neck area, this is kind of what we want it to look like. You can tell that even when I look at these individual places with the individual cords, you can see where they really want to be. The curl tells you where they want to go. And if I split, there's that beautiful line, beautiful definition. Even, like this guy, I can even split this smaller because it's ready. So for him, this is probably one of the harder regions to do. That's why he's on the table. Doesn't really like me doing them. So I may start with bigger chunks and then work my way down to some of these individual pieces. Again, I'm not going to forget my texture rule, because otherwise I'm going to split places that aren't quite ready. You can tell how much he likes me doing this side. So, now the last place I want to talk about, well, no, sorry, not the last place I want to talk about, but I want to talk about the leg area back here. Because we had talked about that being a good and bad spot just because of the fact that he lays on it. And you can see, looking at it, that it just has a very different texture. I've done very little work on these guys, but they're kind of doing it all their own. And again, part of that's because of the way that he lays on it. So I really don't have to do as much, I don't have to wait as long for these guys to come together, because his moving back and forth and slouching on each thigh has worked to make it nice and dense and to give me my texture. And basically all I'm going to do, I'm honoring what the little curls at the end are telling me. So this one is telling me that's one altogether. It may eventually become two, but I'm not going to force it. And I'm just going to kind of separate it from everybody around it. Sometimes I'll get these paddly sections where it's really terrible. Everything's flat down. And again, if you can't find, he's recently been washed, so if you can't find your curls, I would recommend washing, letting it dry, and seeing if you can get those curls to pop back out like we talked about in an earlier video. Okay, let's see if we can get this a little bit better. Ooh, it's just a terrible mess down here. I've been saving it just for you guys. But again, all I'm doing is honoring the lines, what his coat is telling me it wants to do. I'm not going to force it. It's not going to end up being beautiful little sections yet. It's going to take us a little while. It's going to be a little ugly for a while. All right, let's come around the front. So, let's talk white. His white's actually doing better than it did the last time. I think I've been a little bit better about keeping it cleaner and about watching it. But you can see it's pretty thin at the bottom and it's big and wispy at the ends. That's fine again. That's something that'll become more delineated, and some of these will break apart or they'll become thinner as we go along and as his coat grows. Ears. We talked about this being a bad place for him, especially back here. And I've been a little more vigilant. And again, with here, I can't rely on the curls to really tell me sometimes because they're thick. He gets these waves that don't really tell me anything. So a lot of the times I have to go by feel. Now, there's a couple of ways that I split cords in general. So we can split, as I said, from the top down, like I've been doing. So basically you find a spot and you split. Now the other way, let me see if I can find a section that we can do it that way. The other way that I do it is from the bottom up. Now usually the reason I'll do it from the bottom up, and usually I do it more when his cords are more established, is that maybe I don't really have a clear delineation somewhere. And so the easiest way, or I've got a clear delineation and I just can't get through the thickness, like pulling through, it doesn't really want to come apart like that. What I'm going to do is actually work my finger. So I'm going to look and see, wants to split right about there. So I'm actually going to work my finger through the bottom. He hates that spot. Let me see if I can find it again. That'll do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work my finger through into the bottom of the cord. So there we go. I've got one through. I do it with my thumbs usually. I'm going to get the other one in, and I'm just going to pull, once I'm in, up and apart. And what it does is it keeps me from pulling hard on his skin, but I'm still managing to get it apart, and you can still see right down to the skin right there. And sometimes with some of these bigger chunks, it's the only way I can get through them. I don't like to cut them, because when I cut, I inevitably come away with a clump of hair that was originally attached somewhere else. So I prefer not to. I mean, if you have to, all else fails, you can. But personally, I don't tend to, because I find it does more harm than good. All right, last couple places. Top of the head, it's looking good. We've got some nice delineation. So this one, Looks good, and I can tell by this feeling. I can pull this apart. It's looking nice. We talked about this being a scary spot on him, and as you can tell, it's still pretty scary. And again, still pretty fluffy. There's not much I can do with this. It's just gonna have to wait. So, that's about that. Splitting 101. I haven't really worked on this side of him, which is why it looks a little bit scary. If we turn him around, I've done a little bit more work on the other side. Happens to be the judge's side. So you can see if I take the time and I split apart the other sections. Let's see if I can get him to stand up. Stand up. Thank you. This is much more, whoops. This is much more spread out. I've got much better coverage. He looks a lot nicer from this side. Happens to be the judge's side, of course. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get to work on the other side and make it match this one, and even take care of a couple places like over here, which are just about ready to go. So